2024 marks 30 years of our country's democracy. I know you've heard it often enough since the start of this year, but it is an important anniversary to acknowledge. And the recent election of a new government has ushered in yet another historic era in our country's political trajectory. Over the last 30 years, both young and old South Africans have taken up the baton and answered the call to service. And for some of those reflections on exactly how they've done it, I'm joined by Fasiha Hassan, who is a youth leader and who was also part of the historic Fees Must Fall movement. We're hoping for Advocate Moufhe to join us, a struggle veteran and the country's current ambassador to South Sudan. But unfortunately, I think he's traveling, so we weren't able to establish that connection. But I think we will have a delicious conversation with Fasiha. Fasiha, good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Iman. Thanks for having me.
I can still say Happy Youth Day to you because I think you've got 4 more years to still fall into that category.
Yeah, we still have time, and also to say Eid Mubarak to the Muslim community and all those celebrating as well. That's today as well.
And you're as old as our democracy.
Yeah, so I'm 30 years old. I'm part of that so-called born-free generation, and also it's been what a fascinating experience thus far, both good and bad, I'd say.
Fascinating and rewarding because you go from a young student activist to an MPL, the youngest here in Gauteng, to the not-so-youngest politician in South Africa. We were all watching you on Friday, sworn in at the National Assembly, and you are now a Member of Parliament. Yeah,
so I served, my first term I served from 25, and I also became a chairperson in the Gauteng legislature, which was really incredible, and now sort of joining into the national discourse. But for me, Iman, it's actually, I think, a huge success that I'm no longer I am one of the youngest, yes, but I'm not the youngest. And in many ways, everything we said in 2019 about paving the way for other young people to enter is starting to come to fruition. And so for me, it's actually a victory that we have so many more young people and younger people who are entering both into national parliament and in legislatures around the country.
I think what we have arrived at, Fasiha, is a moment of impatience, especially amongst the country's youth when we think about high levels. And we've been talking about unemployment this morning, 45.5% unemployment levels amongst young people between the ages of 15 and 24. In South Africa. So that's a huge demographic that simply is outside meaningful engagement. Yeah. We know that what that brings from a social perspective is a feeling of depression, feelings of not being worthy, of not having anything to do, anywhere to go. And this has been a consistent problem that government's not been able to effectively address over the years. As a young person, when you reflect not only for the access to education, equitable access to education during the movement, to the reality of what we see in South Africa today, where is that dissonance between the stated objectives and policies of a government and the lack of delivery in terms of the experience of young people in our communities?
Look, I think we need to start at this idea of the 15 to 24 range, because whenever we talk about youth, we almost seem like it's this homogenous group of people. A 15-year-old, we don't necessarily want you to get a job and work. We want you to be in some sort of skills training. We want you to be able to better yourself. And even though we're seeing some different interventions along the way, you're quite right, Iman, the majority of young people are being left out of the economy and being left out of those skills opportunities. And even if they are present, they're not long-term, they're not sustainable. And that's been a big focus of a number of us, both from the 2019 or the 6th term going into the 7th term. But also more than that, it's about saying that we as young people often don't feel represented. And I think it's the first time since 1994 that we're starting to see so many young people enter the space. But is that enough? Does that automatically mean we've solved the crisis of young people who have been left out? No. And it's about a number of things. It's about overcoming youth tokenism. That's a whole other conversation. But it's also about moving beyond backbenching as young people. And one of the big things we've been fighting for, and we need to continue to fight for, is an actual seat at the decision-making table. Because so long as we are on the peripherals, we're unable to actually influence that change. But number two, young people will always feel, and this is not specific to one political party, by the way, young people in general don't feel represented by what's currently on the menu. And that's a real wake-up call for so many of us in the country who want to be in these spaces, but more importantly, want to represent a youth constituency.
We do have Moufhe, who has managed to log on. Advocate Moufhe, good morning. Thank you very much for talking to us this morning. We know you as many labels and many things in the country, a struggle veteran. Of course, you were once in the SSA as well. You served in provincial, local and national governments, and now you've been deployed as the ambassador to South Sudan. I've been reflecting with Fasiha, who was born into democracy as a born free, and you were not. Talk to us about the biggest observations that you can make in terms of then and now for young people specifically. Can you hear me?
Well, good morning. You know, I think the problems, the young people experience now are not the problems we experienced in 1976 when we took to the streets fighting for the disbandment of apartheid and Afrikaans as a medium of instructions in our schools. And I think it's important. Oh, good question.
All is forgiven. It's okay.
No, and I think it's important for us. I think it's important for us to appreciate that young people of today, there's no ways in which we can keep on saying young people of 1976 would have wanted us to do things this or that way. Young people of today face challenges of their own. And I think we must understand their problems, as they are, as they manifest today, because they will never be the same as our problems that time. We paved the way for everybody during that time. All these years we have been paving the way for young people of today to take their struggle forward, not to keep on looking back at what we did then, because the situation is completely different, to be honest.
There was a lovely package that was played, Advocate Moufhe, before we came on air, and one of the people involved in the uprising in June 76, on June 16th, Seth Mazibuko said that it was, and it's an old adage, we know this, but said you had to understand the history in order to know where you are going. And so that's the level of significance and importance that we attach to the June 16th moment. But we are in a moment where there is a different struggle and there is a different crisis facing young people. As you reflect on Fees Must Fall then, Fasiha, and on the subject of education as having been that opportunity, it does echo the 1976 moment because education was pivotal then. But we are still in a situation where many young people won't have access to that education, will be closed, the doors of learning will be closed to them. And as a consequence, we don't see them playing the role in the economy that they should.
Well, that's exactly what Fees Must Fall was about. And it's a much broader decolonial movement as well, around accessibility to higher education. And I think there are many parallels, actually, between 1976 and what happened then and what happened now. Of course, the context is very different. The actual nitty-gritty is different. But when you look at what drove people out in 1976, especially young people onto the streets, and what drove young people in 2015 and 2016, is very much the same, to say we as young people have a great stake in the future of this country and we want to be able to make it an incredible place. And in order for us to do that, we need access to higher education, or we need access to education. Of course, it's different. Financial and political is a little bit different. But I think there's a much broader conversation that needs to be had here. And where I agree with Ambassador is that the context is quite different. If you look now at young people access to social media, TikTok, if you see how people consume political messaging, both misinformation and genuine stuff, it's more about TikTok videos, right? It's more about how we express ourselves in different ways. And for the first time, a young 14-year-old can, on the Palestinian struggle, for example, say, I'm not only just going to block all these different celebrities who are not supporting the cause or speaking out, I'm going to produce content as an activist on social media and have my say. And that's very different to what happened before. So I actually think there's some huge benefits, but another whole conversation needs to be had, Iman, about the kinds of pressures on young people. I mean, if you look at the kind of body image issues so many young people have, I mean, I've also suffered with that kind of issue because you see these unrealistic expectations on social media. So the issues that we face are so much more complex in a different way. It doesn't take away from the fight of 1976, which was obviously deeply political, but now also deeply economic in 2024.
Ambassador Moufhe, do you have a TikTok account?
Yes, I do.
We'd love to see Ambassador do all the dances.
I'm pleasantly shocked because I don't have one, and my kids always say, Mom, everyone's posting your content. Why don't you have a TikTok account? Talk to us then about people of your generation, and we call them the sort of veteran generation, using these digital tools as a way to stay in touch with society, and particularly the demographic that uses TikTok, young people?
Iman, I haven't really used it so much, but the reality is that we have to appreciate that my generation specifically, we were more keen on dismantling apartheid, which was oppressive, and ensuring that the medium of instruction in our schools, remember, we're talking about high school children. And, over the years, it looks like we've moved to a situation where we're saying the youth of 1976 were fighting for job opportunities and they wanted to be employed and all sorts of things. The youth of 1976, we wanted to go to university. We wanted to pass, our high school. All we didn't want was that we should be taught mathematics in Afrikaans. But our vision was that we need to show that we want to go to school, we get proper qualifications so that we can participate in ensuring that South Africa gets recognized globally. It was not a question of saying after matric we want to go and look for job opportunities. And I think this is what aches some of us, that it looks like people think that the youth of 1976 wanted to pass matric, or after passing matric, if so, we must go and look for employment. No, we wanted to go to school, yes.
Ambassador, it's sobering because, as you say, there's consonance between that moment and now, and there's also dissonance between that moment and now. We're in a situation where we have to do the thing that really shifts the needle in terms of getting young people out of the rut that they find themselves in, whether it comes to education or to employment, which then again speaks directly to whether our economy can grow or not. And as the peer review reflect on what is contemporary and what is historic, where is the biggest blockage? I mean, young people are watching this conversation today thinking, we don't want to hear philosophy, we don't want to hear platitudes. What's going to move us out of our lived experience? Yes, you've had the fees must fall movement, which went some way in flattening the ground between those who could access higher education and those who didn't. Yes, we've had the 1976 moment that took us over the line into democracy. But what speaks to us in this moment and changes our reality, Fasiha?
Iman, you've hit the nail on its head. Even in this most recent election campaign, speaking and talking to young people, so many of them said, you're right, we might have campaigned and fought during Fees Must Fall in 1976, but we as young people are very bleak about the future of this country, very bleak about our opportunities. I mean, when we did door-to-door, who did we find in people's homes in the middle of the day? Young people who are unemployed, who haven't had opportunities. And I think for this group of people, you're quite right. It's the message is not landing in terms of the historic philosophy, which is fundamentally important, no doubt. We stand on the shoulders of those who fought for us. But we need practical, we need types of policies that I think are very bold. We've seen it, it's in writing there. But you also need a fundamental shift, systemic shift in how we execute economic policy in this country. But more importantly, we need to have almost, let me say it in this way. During COVID-19, we saw the very best of this country. We saw the private sector, the state, civil society, you name it. You saw a group of people in South Africa come together under a common goal. And there was not a single thing we couldn't achieve. Now, in the same way we did that, we need to now deal with youth unemployment, but unemployment generally in this country as well.
I wish I had more time, Advocate Moufhe. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm so sorry you had some difficulties logging on right at the beginning, but thank you for popping by. I'm going to go check out your TikTok account, Ambassador and Advocate Sam.
We must follow each other.
We're going to follow you. And
we must talk off air. Bye.
Yes, we will definitely talk. We'll talk off air. And Fasiha Hassan, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate it so much. We've come to